blood spatter at a crime scene tells a story. What we know for certain is that she was not covered completely in a blanket and carried out of the house. That didn't happen. They were not a sophisticated criminal. That this is not something they've done before. This is far from a cold case. They're going to have his name and his age and his address in a matter of weeks. Sure, blood spatter at a crime scene tells a story, a particular moment in time. And it can tell us what happened and didn't happen before and some of what might have happened after. So in this particular case, I'll refer to the first image, which is, it shows two distinct blood spatter patterns, one in the upper center and one in the lower right. And these are very close to the front door. And what these tell me initially is that this is most likely at the front door where Nancy Guthrie refused to cooperate or put up her last stand, basically, against the abductor. And if there are no blood spatter patterns in the house, I think that totally confirms this, that this is where she decided, that she would not cooperate any further. And as a result, the abductor assaulted her and basically struck her in the face, the mouth or nose area, or both. And she then aspirated blood and then coughed it up. If you go to the second image, which is a close-up of the one from the previous one on the upper center, you'll see two distinct types of patterns, maybe three. And the larger droplets that are sort of in a circle around this dropped almost straight down from her face. And her face then was within inches of the ground when she coughed up. She aspirated and then coughed up this blood that you see, these tiny droplets. Because of the viscosity of blood, in order to get blood droplets that small, there has to be some speed behind it. And medium velocity droplets, like we see here, generally come from coughing or sneezing, whereas high velocity blood droplets would be from a gunshot wound. So there's no evidence of that here at all. But here you also have several droplets that are sort of hollow rings. They're larger in size and they're hollow rings. That's because there was air in that droplet. It was a bubble. And when it hit the ground, it then burst, and you only see the ring of blood instead of the solid droplets of blood that you see elsewhere in this image. So the fact that the larger droplets they don't have much of a tail. There are two that appear to maybe have a little bit of tail, giving us directionality. If she was moving at that time, then there would be tails on all of these big droplets, and they would be pointing in the direction that she was traveling. I don't see that here. So I know that she was either on her knees or hunched over very low, and her mouth was very close to the ground when she made this blood spatter pattern, when she coughed up this blood, because of the narrow nature of these spots. They're fairly well contained. So what we know for certain is that she was not covered completely in a blanket or a tarp and carried out of the house. That didn't happen. And I believe it also rules out multiple offenders at this point, because if she had been under the control of two or more offenders, they would have had no reason to let her drop to the ground. If there was one offender who struck her in the face and then she fell to the ground, then he picked her up, which would account for the fact that the blood droplets dissipate and almost disappear as they then travel towards the vehicle at the end of the walkway. So this tells us a story that at this point, I believe she stood her ground and was punished for it in order to get her back into compliance. And then I believe she was carried away, probably with her face facing upwards, which is why you don't see more concentrated droplets of blood from that point forward.
The blood on Nancy Guthrie's front porch is not just evidence of violence. It is a record of a specific moment, a specific position, A specific sequence of events that played out in a matter of seconds on the night of January 31st, 2026, and that a trained eye can read with far more precision than most people realize. Blood spatter analysis operates on one foundational principle. Blood behaves according to physics. The size of a droplet, the shape it makes on contact, the presence or absence of a tail indicating direction of travel, the hollow ring that forms when a blood bubble bursts on a hard surface. All of these are physical signatures. They record conditions. They freeze a moment in time and hold it there, available to anyone with the training to read it. When you read what is on that porch correctly, not impressionistically, not as a general indication that something violent occurred, but technically, several conclusions emerged that are not theory and are not speculation. They are what the physics of blood tells us happened. Tonight we are going to go through those conclusions carefully. What the porch blood record tells us about Nancy's position at the moment of the assault. What it tells us about the number of people involved. What the 42 minutes between the first footage and the moment her pacemaker connection dropped tells us about the pace and nature of the operation. And what the totality of the physical and behavioral evidence tells us about the specific kind of person who did this, and why they are going to be caught. The blood evidence outside Nancy Guthrie's front door exists in two distinct groupings. Both are close to the entrance. Both appear to have been deposited within a short window of the same event. The first grouping sits toward the upper center of the porch surface. It contains a mixture of solid droplets, some larger, some small, alongside hollow ring formations. The second grouping, slightly to the lower right of the first, shows a similar composition. Let's break down what each element tells us. The hollow rings are the most diagnostically specific detail in the entire pattern. A ring forms when a droplet of blood contains trapped air, when the blood is aerated, when there are bubbles present at the moment of impact. Aerated blood is blood that has passed through the respiratory system. It is the biological signature of blood that has been coughed up from the airway. The hollow ring is what remains when that bubble strikes a hard surface and bursts. This tells us, with significant confidence, that Nancy was aspirating blood, that she had been struck in the face, the nose or mouth, with enough force to cause internal bleeding, and that blood had entered her airway and was expelled through coughing. The smaller solid droplets surrounding the hollow rings are consistent with medium-velocity spatter, the category produced by the physical force of a cough rather than the extreme velocity of a gunshot wound. High-velocity gunshot spatter produces a mist of near-microscopic particles. What we see here is coarser, more varied, and entirely consistent with the biological mechanics of coughing blood. Now, the directionality. Most of the larger droplets in the pattern do not have pronounced tails. The elongated shape a droplet develops when blood is moving at the moment of impact. A droplet that falls straight down from a stationary source lands as a relatively circular shape. A droplet from a moving source develops an oval with a directional tail. The near-circular shape of most of the larger droplets here tells us that the source was not moving when the blood was deposited. Nancy was still. She was not being carried. She was not walking. She was stationary, and based on the proximity of the staining to the ground level, her face was close to the surface when this blood left her body. Within inches, she was on her knees, or hunched forward with her upper body nearly parallel to the ground. She was not standing. She was not being held upright by a second person. She was down. The blood record does more than tell us where Nancy was. It tells us what did not happen. The first thing it rules out. She was not transported from inside the house wrapped in a covering that contained the blood evidence. A blanket or tarp used to conceal an injured person would have absorbed the blood before it reached the porch surface. The existence of these patterns on the exposed concrete means the blood fell freely from an open wound in the open air. Whatever happened inside the house did not produce the blood on the porch. The porch is where the physical confrontation occurred. The second thing it rules out, multiple people physically present and in control of Nancy at the moment she went down. This requires a moment of explanation. When two or more people have physical control of a subject, when they are carrying them, guiding them, restraining them on both sides, the subject does not fall. There is no reason for the subject to reach ground level, because the controlling parties prevent it. The blood pattern here requires Nancy to have reached a position within inches of the ground. That position is only available if the person controlling her briefly lost that control, or if she actively went down and there was only one person there to respond. Two offenders with a controlled grip do not produce a blood pattern that requires the victim's face to be nearly at ground level. One offender who struck her watched her go down and then had to reassert physical control. That produces exactly this pattern. The single smear visible in the lower right of the first grouping is consistent with the offender's foot or lower body moving through blood that had already settled on the surface. The physical trace of someone stepping into the staining as they bent down to pick her up. After that point, the blood trail dissipates toward the end of the walkway. The most coherent explanation: Nancy was lifted and carried, face upward. With her face oriented skyward rather than downward, the blood from her injuries no longer fell forward onto the path. The trail ends because her body position changed. She was carried to a vehicle. One person carried her. There is a timeline detail in this case that has not received the analytical attention it deserves. The individual visible on the Nest camera footage appeared at the front of the property at a specific point in the evening. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker monitoring application disconnected from her phone approximately 42 minutes later. 42 minutes. In a kidnapping operation designed for speed, in and out, minimal exposure, maximum efficiency. 42 minutes is an extraordinarily long time to spend inside a target's residence. Professional operations of this type are typically measured in minutes, not in nearly 3/4 of an hour. What does that extended timeline tell us? It is consistent with someone who did not encounter the situation exactly as they expected. Someone who met resistance, not physical resistance initially, because a firearm visible in the footage would have been an effective tool of compliance for the first portion of the encounter, but resistance of a different kind. Negotiation. Delay. An 84-year-old woman who was frightened and compliant as long as she believed she was in danger inside her own home, but who understood, at the moment she was being moved toward the front door, that leaving was the more dangerous outcome. That moment of understanding is where the porch confrontation likely originated. She complied through the house. She resisted at the threshold, and the blood on the porch is the record of what happened when she did. The 42 minutes also speaks to something about the offender's psychology. A professional, someone who had done this before, who had pre-planned with operational discipline, does not take 42 minutes. They are in and out. The extended timeline is consistent with someone who thought they had planned carefully, but encountered a human variable they had not fully prepared for. An elderly woman who, in the final moment, decided not to go. The physical evidence and the behavioral record, read together, produce a profile, not a guess, a documented set of characteristics that the evidence supports. Start with the equipment. The clothing chosen for a nighttime operation was light in color, not dark, not optimized for concealment in low-light conditions. The backpack had reflective straps, a practical feature for daytime use, a liability for a covert nighttime operation. The face covering appears to have been a breathable material, effective for comfort, less effective for preventing the shedding of biological material. These are not the equipment choices of someone with experience in covert operations. They are the choices of someone who thought about preparation, but did not think about it from a practitioner's perspective. The camera interaction reinforces this. A trained operative who identified a security camera during pre-operational reconnaissance comes equipped to deal with it. A cover, a tool, something that handles the problem in the first seconds of approach. What the footage shows is improvisation, a gloved hand raised over the lens, a retreat to find foliage from the yard, an eventual decision to remove the device entirely, after multiple unsuccessful attempts at improvisation. This is not the choreography of someone who has done this before. This is someone adapting in real time to a problem they knew existed, but had not fully solved in advance. There may also be a visible wrist tattoo in the footage, partially captured in one of the frames. If confirmed by forensic image analysis, that becomes a specific physical identifier, not a general description, but a documentable marking. The totality of the equipment profile and the behavioral record points to a consistent conclusion. This person believed they were prepared. The gap between what they planned and what they executed reveals they were not. Beyond the physical evidence, the behavioral profile of the offender suggests something specific about their connection to this case. Real kidnapping for ransom operations maintains secrecy as a core operational requirement. The ransom communication in this case went to television stations, guaranteeing immediate media involvement, which guarantees law enforcement involvement at scale. That choice makes sense only if the exposure itself was part of the goal. If the objective was not simply to collect money in a private transaction, but to be seen, to generate attention, to reach a specific person through the most reliable amplification channel available. That profile, someone who wanted the attention, who wanted Savannah Guthrie to acknowledge them publicly, who may have built a one-sided psychological connection to a public figure and felt compelled to force a response, is what forensic psychologists call a fixation-motivated offender. Not financially motivated in the conventional sense, motivated by the need for acknowledgement from someone who had never acknowledged them. Savannah made videos. She made direct public appeals. She spoke, on camera, to whoever had taken her mother. And every one of those responses was, in a specific psychological sense, exactly what this person had been seeking. This does not require a close prior relationship with Nancy or Savannah. It requires proximity, a service call, a delivery, an Uber ride, a repair visit, during which enough information was gathered to build a plan. Nancy lived alone. She was the mother of a famous person. She was vulnerable in ways that someone watching carefully would identify. And someone did watch carefully. The investigative implication is specific. Go back through every person with a documented reason to have been in proximity to Nancy Guthrie over the past several years. Anyone who did work on the property, made deliveries, provided any kind of service. The connection will be there. Minor, transactional, unremarkable at the time. But there, the public perception of this investigation, that it has stalled, that nearly 3 months without a named suspect means the case has gone cold, reflects a misunderstanding of how forensic genetic genealogy works and what it means that it is being actively pursued. Forensic genetic genealogy is not a passive process. It requires a usable DNA profile, which requires successful extraction from the biological material recovered at the scene. If investigators have isolated a profile from the evidence, from the hair found in Nancy's bedroom, from contact points within the home, then the work of genetic genealogy is underway, and it is not a process that gets interrupted by the absence of press conferences. It is methodical, sustained, and ultimately very likely to produce a name. When that name emerges, the investigation does not stop there. Every other thread in the case, the surveillance footage, the equipment profile, the behavioral analysis, the pre-incident witness accounts, gets tested against it. If the name connects the threads, the case assembles quickly. Arrests do not come until the case is fully built, because a premature arrest gives a suspect time to construct a defense before the evidence against them is fully documented. The silence from investigators is not inactivity. It is discipline. And there is another path running in parallel. The person who did this did not become a different person after February 1st. They are still in the world, managing the stress of a months-long investigation, monitoring the coverage, changing their appearance, adjusting their behavior in ways that people around them notice. Someone who lives with this person, works with them, knows them, has noticed those changes. They may not have connected what they observed to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. But when the right question is asked, When investigators arrive with a name and begin building context around it, those observations will surface. The combination of genetic genealogy producing a name and the behavioral changes of the offender producing witness accounts from people in their life. That is how this case closes. The blood on that porch, the 42-minute timeline, the reflective backpack straps, the improvised camera response, the ransom note sent to television stations instead of to the family. None of these are random details. They are a portrait. A portrait of someone who planned this thoroughly enough to execute it, but not thoroughly enough to disappear cleanly afterward. Someone who left biological material in the bedroom they entered. Someone whose equipment choices and behavioral signature are documented in footage that is being analyzed by people with more tools than most people realize. This is not a cold case. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since February 1st, 2026. She is 84 years old. She is someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone whose absence has been a daily reality for the people who love her for nearly 3 months. The investigation is moving. The evidence is being processed. And somewhere in the Tucson area, or wherever this person has gone since January 31st, someone knows something. Maybe not everything, maybe just one detail that seems disconnected. But the FBI needs that detail. 1-800-CALL-FBI. Tips.fbi.gov. Anonymous. Over $1 million available for information that leads to answers. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Based on the blood evidence and the behavioral profile covered in this episode, do you believe this was one person acting alone? And do you think the forensic genealogy produces a match before the 4-month mark? Subscribe to Unresolved Years if you're not already. Turn on notifications. This case is not finished, and neither is this channel's coverage of it. I'm Webb. Thank you for watching.